All right, well, welcome everybody. We will get started. Welcome to today's August 9th, 2024 Big Valley Groundwater Sustainability Plan Advisory Committee, otherwise known as GSPAC, here for the County of Lake. We'll go ahead and get started on our agenda item 1, which is the roll call. And while we're doing the roll call, we'll go ahead and do a brief introduction for everybody as we go around. So I'll start with our committee members first, and then we'll move on from there. So David Weiss.
President, do you want me to introduce?
Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, just who you are.
Belvis, the farming company. We farm pears and wine grapes in Lake County, most of which is in the Big Valley area.
All right, thank you. And Pat Scully unfortunately could not make it. He was having some issues with his harvest, so he won't be here. We'll look forward to sending him our meeting minutes and video. Sarah Ryan, also not here. Scott Hornig.
Scott Hornig, Lake County Special District.
All right. And Val Nixon.
Val Nixon, Lake County Land Trust.
All right. Rebecca Harper.
Here, Lake County Farm Bureau Executive Director.
And then myself, I'm Mitchell Breedlove with the Watershed Protection District, also known as Water Resources Department, and I help lead the GSPAC for here. We'll go around to my right, which is Christy.
I think everybody in the room knows who I am, but I am Christy Clark from Stantec, and we are on loan to Lake County to do facilitation support for the GSPAC meetings and a few other items that we'll talk about later.
All right.
Bridget Lowry, working with Christy also with the facilitation support services contract.
Hello everyone, Pawan Upadhyay, Water Resources Director for the Lake County and the Watershed Protection District.
Leah. Yeah.
Leah Jackson, staff hydrogeologist with LSCE, helped out with this year's annual report for Big Valley Basin.
All right.
Yeah, Eddie Teasdale also with Rural Discovery Consulting Engineers out of Chico. I've seen some of you guys in quite a while. If you recall, my partner in crime, John McHugh, was also would show up every once in a while. Unfortunately for us, fortunate for John, he retired. I think I drove him into retirement. So that way you've been helping John over the last year for on the annual report. So happy to be here.
And Quinn Little with the California Department of Water Resources, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, point of contact for Lake County and Big Valley in general.
Great. And then we do have Angela online. If you want to unmute and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Angela from Lake County Water Resources, Watershed Protection District. I'm presenting today, manage our surface water quality programs, invasive species programs.
All right, thank you very much. Bridget, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host in case anybody joins. All right, well, we will move on to agenda item 2, which is review and approve December 21st minutes, March 22nd minutes, and May 31st. However, I believe because Sarah and Pat are not here that we do not have a quorum for those meetings. So unfortunately, we will have to postpone that to the next one, and we will have a lot of meeting minutes to go through at the next one.
We can approve the
May ones.
The May 31st, okay.
I'd like that ask for a change.
Okay.
On item 3.1 in the last paragraph, talks about land trust owning land near Clipper Lane, 300 acres. We own 30 acres there, but the land I was talking about was actually near Manning Creek, 300 acres. So just, I can see how it would get mixed up there.
So what is the correction?
To Manning Creek, it's on North Soda Bay Road, I guess, south, Main Street.
So Valerie, you would then like the sentence to read, Nixon alerted the group that the Lake County Land Trust had purchased 300 acres of land near Manning Creek, where they intend to do riparian restoration.
Right, that would probably identify where it is, but we purchased 2 different.
Okay. Are there any other changes that anybody sees?
My last name spelled should be Hornung.
Thank you, Scott. Apologies.
No worries.
Okay.
I think Sarah Ryan's in the hospital.
Oh, no.
Oh, my gosh.
Got an infection in her leg from
Oh, no.
Oh
races or something.
Oh, my goodness.
my goodness, I hope she's okay.
An infection, she got cut and while they were doing the Thule races,
Oh, wow.
so I think she might be in hospital. right now.
Wow.
At least I thought.
She is out. She's in healing. She's a little
Okay,
better.
good.
Yes.
Okay. I do that. Well, okay, we will make those changes and bring those at least the May 31st. Unfortunately, the other ones, so, or unless we can
You can go ahead
approve
and approve them with,
with the,
as amended.
okay,
I'll move that we approve them as amended.
Second.
all right. Al moved and Rebecca seconds. With that, we will move on to our agenda item 3, which is a Big Valley Groundwater Sustainability Sigma context. And I will go ahead and introduce Eddie Teasdale, who was a big portion of developing the GSP for the county, and he will take it over from here.
Great, I'm gonna come up.
Okay.
At the back, and I can't sit still, so I gotta walk around. So you'll notice. Tell me to sit down. Do we have a little clicker, or are you gonna be my?
I can be your clicker. Just let me know.
All right, well, thanks again, really happy to be here. Next slide, please. So these are the kind of the topics that I was gonna touch on today, cover, and then you can kind of see how they had aligned with the agenda items. Kind of my understanding is specific to sort of projects and management actions. I think I'm gonna kind of maybe touch on it. I think you're gonna be dive into it a little bit more.
Yes.
But these are the sort of the 4 elements of kind of what I was gonna cover today. And then I know there's been some questions about the GSP, some of the assumptions, variables in the GSP. My thought was we could kind of maybe hold those questions to the end, and then we can open up and you guys can ask me, these questions about what was when it went into the GSP, why did we do it this way? I'll do my best to kind of address those. So specific to Sigma, there are a couple of new faces. Just wanted to kind of show you kind of where we've been and where we're going. So, obviously Sigma was enacted sort of back 2014, 2015. There was a lot of back and forth, GSP development, some agencies started that a little earlier than others. I forget when you guys started it, maybe was it 2021? I don't remember, but we pulled it together. So 2022, the GSP was submitted to DWR. And then also in 2022, we took some of those remaining funds, Quinn, close your ears, and we utilized that to help with the annual report, because there's annual reports that are due every year, April 1st. So that was sort of 2022 GSP gets submitted, also as the annual report gets submitted. And then as we kind of move through, it took DWR about a year and a half to review the GSP. Fortunately, it was approved, which is good. And then in 2023, obviously we have another annual report that kind of pops up. So we worked with the county and we kind of, did what we could to kind of put together the annual report in 2023, same to 2024. And so we're making progress on that, but kind of behind the scenes, something else we need to do is we need to address some of the deficiencies that were identified by DWR in the GSP. So when does that need to happen? I mean, we need to submit it to DWR as part of this periodic update in 2027. So kind of keep that in mind as we start to have some of these conversations about that DWR determination letter. Meanwhile, we're also doing the updates to the annual report every year. And that's going to kind of continue, if we like it or not, out to 2042 when we're supposed to be sustainable. I think fortunately you're in a pretty good sub base that I would say, you're kind of sustainable now. And then every year the annual reports are done, and then every 5 years you've got to put together those periodic updates. Are there any questions on sort of where we've been, where we're at today, and kind of where we're headed, specifically to the Sigma regulations? Yes, Val.
This happened at the very beginning of us getting together, but could you explain why we were identified, what we're identified as, and why we have to do the GSP? Yeah, so I'm a little rusty on some of that. So Quinn, maybe you can jump in here, but essentially I don't recall. I think the big drivers. So when DWR went through and sort of evaluated all these sub-basins, they had this criteria. They said, hey, if you've got so many wells per acre, if you've got a population of this size, and there was like, I think 10, 12 criteria. So they summarized these numbers up. I think the biggest driver for Big Valley was the sort of the interconnection between surface water and groundwater. That was what I recall is really was the driver.
And the agriculture.
And agriculture
Yeah.
demand, yeah. So pumpers in the agriculture.
So we're designated as a
Medium priority.
medium
Yeah.
priority.
Yeah.
And there was a big thing afoot that probably some people remember of trying to get it downgraded to the low
Mhm.
priority on the bulletin 118, but like that was kind of short-lived, and they won't reevaluate those anytime soon. So that's kind of where everybody's.
So it's
at.
called medium priority.
It's a medium priority basin. So there's medium, there's high priority, there's critically overdraft. So there's like different levels of it. And so medium is kind of the lowest that you get to have to comply with all of the requirements. The low priorities do not have to do the GSP, although some of them choose to do it. So
Just, actually, I had become unclear on that after all this year. Thank you.
yeah.
And I recently looked at the points breakdown for Big Valley. They used a point system to rank these. There is no one thing that is pushing Big Valley into the medium priority basins. There's not one thing that if it were to change or, be evaluated in a different way would knock Lake County down into low priority. It's kind of everything added together is pushing Big
It's
Valley.
trying to
into
keep
that
us from becoming a
borderline.
high priority.
Very much so. Yeah.
That's
very much.
That was just my question. 'Cause
Yeah.
I sort of lost track, so.
No, I mean, yeah, no, I kind of had to, so, yeah, so.
Sorry.
Is there not another one? About the periodic update, where's that table? Towards the back.
Maybe further into the,
Okay, so the next slide would be, don't have to get there. Just
Okay.
use your imagination, we'll cover it when we get to it. It's sort of what's required for these periodic updates. So they used to be called, I think, the 5-year update for obvious reasons. Now it's sort of changed to what they're calling this periodic update. And that's again where we're going to be required to sort of show the DWR, hey, what have you been doing since the original plan was submitted in 2022, specific to some of these items that they want addressed in the letter that I think some of you have in front of you. So we'll cover that in a second. You can just sort of see the table of contents. It's a guidance document that DWR has prepared. Christy mentioned, there's different priority basins or critically overdrafted basin. We're not, but they're 2 years ahead of us. And so their GSPs were due in 2020. Their periodic updates are due in 2025, so next year. So we've got some inklings of what kind of goes into those plans. And it's obviously a little more effort than the annual reports, but not as much, my opinion, not as much effort for your sub-basin as what was required for the GSP.
Is Ludov working on any of those that are going to be due next year?
Yes, several. Yes.
So you'll have firsthand knowledge of how
Yeah.
the whole process is going.
And Stantec is helping to support facilitation wise a number of basins that are going through that. So, and the determinations, the ones that were incomplete. So we've been working with them on those as well. So kind of that big picture.
Okay, I'm just going to show my ignorance. Did you say Luda?
Ludov and Scalamini, they're
Okay.
fine.
Oh, the firm, yeah, thank you.
LSCE, we can use,
LSCE.
Eddie and his
Yeah,
folks.
Sorry.
Any other questions sort of on this sort of schedule? Okay. We'll cover the periodic update at some point. So now what we're going to get into is, this is sort of the letter that's in front of you that sort of summarizes up some of the, the recommendations that came out of the BWR's review. There's several in there, folks would read it like, we got to approve, but look at all the stuff we have to do. This is nothing compared to some of these sub-basins. Most of these are, I would say, light lifts. So I don't see huge concerns, but there's some changes they're requesting. So I think if you want to kind of go through the next, I think it's the next slide.
Yeah.
What we've done is we've sort of tried to kind of capture what those are, and I'm happy to have a conversation. You have it in front of you. But there were some questions about, data gaps always comes up. Like we never have enough data, but we don't have a lot of data in the upland areas. So we don't really understand, maybe as much as we should on the water levels, the fluxes coming in. So they would like us to sort of address those data gaps. So what does that mean? Really, it means getting resources to put in either additional wells or do additional monitoring. Unfortunately, we applied for a grant back in 2020, the end of 2022. We didn't get the funding because we were going to use that funding to help address some of these corrective actions that DWR had mentioned. So is it going to be a deal breaker for this particular item if we go in on our periodic update and say, hey, we haven't done anything because we don't have the funding? I mean, that we're gonna get an X next to our name, but I really don't think in this sub-basin, what I'm seeing over the last couple of years, it's not critical that we understand that. I mean, this is not gonna help us get a better sense of sustainability. And I think we've got a pretty good job of that. This is sort of, I would say, a nice item to have. So if there's funding out there that's coming through the state that we can apply for to sort of fill those data gaps, or if we can convince Quinn to open those purse strings and maybe he could use some of his internal funding to help support that, I would say that would be probably the most likely way to get this fulfilled. I really don't want to take this item or a lot of these items. I don't really think it's worth the effort to put the cost of this on the county. A, because they can't afford it, and B, I just don't think a lot of these items are that critical. That's just my opinion, but maybe DWR might push back at some point. And I'll show you the reasons. I mean, there's reasons why I don't think, we need to do a lot of this, because the basin for the most part is sustainable. Yeah, there's some issues that we need to figure out, but the basin for the most part is sustainable.
What would the approximate cost of a well be if you needed to do it?
Yeah, so these wells, I'm guessing for this kind of analysis, you're probably looking at shallow wells. We did this valve up in Scotts Valley. You're looking at 20 grand for a shallow well. You're looking at $200,000 for a nested completion a deep completion monitoring well. So deep completion monitoring well, let's call it 600 feet with 3 different zones of root sample, something like that.
The monitoring portion would just be taking readings on those wells.
Exactly, or water quality, you need to, yeah. So, but it's not cheap, but I know, there's opportunities through TSS, and I know you've used some of that already. So maybe at some point, if there's any funds left over, we can have a conversation about this, or maybe there's some of it already been done.
There's 2 wells at least planned that don't have a definitive location yet.
Perfect.
I'm not sure how much wiggle room the TSS program will allow us, but
yeah,
it's probably worth talking about in the future once we're ready for looking at those more seriously.
Yeah. So I think that's the key, is partnering with DWR to do this.
There was talk about the 2 wells that they were going to install down in the Big Valley, one off the highway and one some road. Have those been done?
Kelsey Creek is done, so that's off of right by the detention center. Thank you, off of Losa Road. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the TSS update, but the other one is imminent. I'd say it should be pretty soon.
All right.
And then that's the first item. Second item is really tied to the sustainable management criteria, and we'll talk about this during the annual report. But remember, for the sustainable management criteria, there's sort of 5 items we need to look at: water levels, change in storage, water quality, interconnected surface water, those kind of things. We'll cover them. But really, this comment is tied to groundwater levels. So if you remember, in the groundwater sustainability plan, we set these MOs. So the MO is sort of the ideal level.
Measurable objectives,
Yeah, Eddie's terrible with acronyms. And then you've got the MT, the minimum threshold. And that's sort of the low. We don't want to go below the MT. So when we went through this process, and this is quite controversial, was like on the MT, because if you hit the MT, there's some criteria. Like if you hit the MT over 2 consecutive years, there's projects and management actions that have to be implemented that are expensive. So the thought was, when we talked about setting the MT minimum threshold, do we want to set it at a fall, which is typically the lowest, or do we want to set it at a spring level, which is obviously a little higher than the fall? And we decided to set it at the spring. DWR doesn't like that. And I understand why, but here's a question for you. If we set the MT at the fall level, okay, and it drops below that, and that's the lowest it's ever going to be. But then in the spring, it pops up. We went to all this effort, we got everybody panicking, but realized we had a wet winter, it comes back up. But I also understand, we don't want to have that water level drop any lower than the lowest of low. So we're going to have to adjust that. I have it backwards. We have to adjust that. We're going to go from the spring to the fall.
Like they should do both.
Well, we keep track of all that. It's just where that red line is, So I understand why they're requiring, and we've seen this in other subbasins, but it's just like, I just want to get everybody to panic. We hit the MT in the fall, but in the spring it comes back up.
Well, at the time, we didn't have the AEM data. We didn't have a lot of information that we were trying
Yeah.
to still, there's a lot of data gaps. With
Yeah,
different usage and the frost protection stuff and all the other things that we were.
So we're gonna have to reevaluate that. It's not a huge deal. You'll see in some of these hydrographs.
But it's inarguable. We're not gonna win the argument.
We tried when we submitted the GSP.
Yeah,
We submitted GSPs that were rejected, not solely because of that, but so they're pretty adamant about it. And I think there's a comment in there that they mentioned that. So we're gonna have to address that.
and so the main issue there will be dry wells.
Well, that's what's one issue. And the other issue is you just don't want to have that fall water level continue to drop lower and lower and lower. You want to fix it, you want to have actions in place if that water level drops below that.
But is that a function of what the shallowest well is? Or is that a function of where the
Yeah, so that the
aquifer is?
MT, right, the way the MTs are set right now, it's just a general water level trend. We don't bring into well screen intervals. We don't differentiate between a shallow system and a deeper system.
Because the cheapest solution may be to drill a few deeper wells for people, is all I'm saying.
And it's
If that's
happening.
what
Yep.
the issue is, right?
Right.
If it's 3 wells go dry because that's the minimum threshold and we exceed it or go below it or whatever, maybe rather than do, $700,000 worth of stuff or whatever it might be, maybe we just deepen people's wells.
Right. Yeah, but again, as long as that fall water level doesn't continue to drop. I mean, if it drops, down 5 feet, 10 feet, wells are impacted, but we maintain that water level.
Yeah.
I can see that as a benefit. And that's being proposed in a lot of these sub-basins where it's, that they're being forced to do demand management
Mhm.
and well mitigation. And a lot of the ag folks are saying, hey, you're gonna put me out of business when I could deepen my neighbor's well for 60 grand.
Yeah.
And that's part of this is a beneficial use for everybody.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, which is why something like the advisory committee becomes so important, right? Like to sit and to think about all those things, and it's not this static kind of just checking off boxes and
Yeah.
things like that.
so I think that's the first bullet in the item 2. And then kind of the second 2 bullets are sort of related, but it's just really just trying to provide sort of more context in how the benefits to all the water users and particularly the groundwater dependent ecosystems, right? I mean, we kind of picked up on that when we were developing it. We don't have the best data sets for the GDEs, and there needs to be more active monitoring, and I think there's some going on already, but I mean, and the monitoring really is the shallow wells and better understanding of the health of the GDEs. That's something that we have to address. And I think the tribe's doing some of that, but we need to think through about, hey, how do we show some progress, because it's got to go into the periodic update, but at the same time, for the most part, water levels are pretty stable. So right now things are okay. So, but we need to address that.
But the fall minimum well levels, is that based off of several monitoring wells average, or is there one well that they're taking this reading from? And
Yeah, so the way it's set up, and we'll cover this in the annual report. I don't know how we're doing on time, so just kick me under the table. with time. We're behind.
If we can speed up, just a little bit.
I'll cover it in the annual report. There's
Yeah,
six
yeah, it
wells.
is coming up.
6
It's
wells.
coming up.
Yeah. All right, so we're on 3. I don't know if folks want to read through them, maybe. Is that quicker than me just kind of spurting on them? And this is really just sort of an explanation of better understanding of the water quality. We have a bit of water quality in the GSP. We might want to step that up a little bit. I think we utilize primarily total dissolved solids. Why? It gives you a representation of the general water quality. Should we be looking at more analytes? Sure, it costs more money. So, it's one of those balancing things.
Is the expense in testing, basically for,
I mean, if you're going out to collect one water quality sample for TDS, it's not much more expensive to add on a couple of analytes. So
right, but is it the lab costs?
that's primarily the
Yeah.
driver.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes it from whatever, $100 to $300,
Yeah.
but it adds up.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's see what it's for say.
Is that all done locally now, that animal?
No, it's through Alpha Labs in Ukiah.
This is specific to the interconnected surface water groundwater. there's some guidance that's starting to come out from DWR now. So again, we've got these creeks. And they want to understand the hydraulic connection between the surface water and the groundwater. And there's going to be a time where we're going to have to maintain sort of an annual flux. So we're not going to be able to sort of, put in wells near creeks and just drain those creeks. So there's going to have to be sort of a better analysis and better understanding of that hydraulic connection. And we're going to have to maintain certain flows in the creeks. In some cases, that's going to be the only way to do that is to maybe throttle back pumping in certain areas. We kind of punted on this during the 2022 plan. It's really expensive. And then also we've seen through the 2020 plans, including the overdrafted basin plans, DWR was, I wouldn't say giving us a free pass, but they're like, hey, we don't have this guidance document out, this best management practices. So, we don't want to come up with our own methodology. Let's see what DWR's got. So that's pieces have come out. I think the more robust documents come out later this
The
year.
first of 3, and then there will be a summary document is how it's all going to go. And once that guidance is released, everyone will know. So it's not specific to this basin. It's overall that they're trying to develop.
Right. And I would say in California, I mean, obviously the water levels are easier to visualize. This is going to be huge. Think about like the Sacramento River and who's pumping around Sacramento. I mean, this is going to be huge. So I would say there's an issue here. We've got to get some monitoring in place, shallow wells along some of these creeks. But I mean, this is nothing compared to what some of these other subbasins are going to go through. So that's sort of a gist for that item.
And it's one of the least understood things, right? And all of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's really easy to model, but it's having the data sets to back up the model. Yeah. So and then I think, what is this one? This is sort of
I believe Angela has a question.
Oh, yeah, Angela.
Hi, thank you. Sorry. The last item you discussed, has your group been apprised of the study that the CDFW, or I think Water Board is doing it specifically, and they're using a lot of Adobe Creek data specifically for looking at surface water depletions and groundwater relationships. In fact, I think 2 years ago, they got $500,000 to get a contractor to do that study.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we had some initial discussion. They wanted a copy of our model, what we sent them. But I mean, again, since the GSP was submitted, we haven't really been that active because the resources haven't been there. I mean, I would love to work for you guys for free, but it's hard. So we haven't, I know I'm aware of the studies, but I haven't seen any of the data. I'm not familiar with where that's at. But that's great. They're picking up a tab. So that's for the periodic update. Let's get a bit of credit and feed that into the periodic update to let them know we're doing something, not nothing. So
yeah, and that's an important component too, Angela, to know that there's going to be a lot of things that we know better now, like the AEM data that came in. There's going to be an entire flood component and recharge component that's going to start coming out from the state too. So like there's lots of pieces that come from it. And the good news is we got the approved plan, and now we can look at all these things as we go forward to put together.
So I think at the science symposium actually on Friday, they are presenting what they know so far about that project that they're doing. And that's in Mitchell's session. So that'll be understanding stream flows and groundwater, what we know and what we don't. So I don't know if that's an update with their current information that they have. So just so you know for your group.
Excellent. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you so much. I think 5 really is just trying to make sure that we're kind of utilizing the best monitoring network. I think we had 6 wells. I think we would sort of propose an additional well in sort of the southwest corner, which I don't think has been put in. So just, again, it's all about filling those data gaps when we can. So,
all right. With that, we'll be moving on to our agenda item 4, which is going to be the Big Valley GSPAC business. A lot of you had asked, and we're going to try to answer some of the questions that have been brought up from the committee members. We'll be going over the annual report that we had for 2023, which was submitted this year, as well as the 2027 GSP resubmission periodic update. So with that, Eddie will also be mostly leading this one as well. Yeah.
So yeah, as Mitchell sort of mentioned, we GSP was submitted 2022, first annual report we did sort of in-house, and then the 23 report, 24 report, limited resources. Talk to Mitchell, say, hey, how can we get this report submitted? So what we ended up doing was my boss is not happy, is we did most of the analysis. We sent Mitchell a template. We said, Mitchell, put this table here, put this text here. And so that's kind of how we've been kind of hobbling along since 22 and 23. So 23 and 24. So this is a sort of a summary of the 23 report. So this is water year 23. So it was submitted in April 2024. So what's required? Can you
Sorry.
Give me a dirty look around.
No, you're good. You're
Okay.
good.
What's required for these annual reports is, it's just really just that, I would say it's more like a high school report card, how are you doing and how are you doing in what? They want to see an update on groundwater conditions. What are groundwater conditions? That's the contour maps. That's the hydrographs. Water level changes. Then also we got a change in storage. So how is groundwater levels? How do they fluctuate sort of, within the bathtub? Are they generally coming up? Are they decreasing? So that's something else we need to report. And then we kind of tie that back to a water budget. So kind of like you're checking or your bank balance, what are the inputs and what are the outputs? And ideally, you got a bit of money left over at the end. So it's like just a water budget instead of your sort of your banking budget. And then also the big one is sort of what progress has been made towards, the GSP implementation, specifically projects and management actions. So what have you done in the last year to sort of address some of these, deficiencies, or what you lay out in your projects and management action section. So I'm just going to kind of walk through these, and we can kind of see some various content. So Mitchell, next slide, please. So this is really maybe a little harder to see. Easier. I don't know if you have packets, but this is just a contour map. So again, this is required. This is looking at the contour map. I believe this is this the fall? I think it's the fall. Is it spring?
This is winter, spring.
Okay, so it's winter, spring. There you go, right in front of you. Can't read. So again, we've got to show sort of the two extremes. So we look at a sort of a spring, which generally water levels are up, and then we look at a fall, water levels are down. And so this is again required. So you can kind of see there's the sub-basin. We've got some squirrely lines on there. Those are the contour maps. If you look really, really carefully, you'll see some little red dots and black dots. The red dots are the RMS wells. So those are the wells that were required where we developed the sustainable management criteria, the MO, the measurable objective, and the MT, the minimum threshold. The other dots are just wells that we collect data from, but we want to utilize those in the contouring map, but we're not managing the sub-basin based on that data. So again, this is looking at the spring 2023. And then the next slide is looking at the fall 2023. So it's a little harder to see. The groundwater flow direction might change a little bit, but for the most part, it's sort of flowing from the north to the south. And then you can kind of see the similar amount of data. So again, it's being collected. We'll talk about sort of some of the details of the individual hydrographs, I think, next, Mitchell. I'll kind of pause after we get cut through this section. So you can kind of see what we did in the GSP is we divided the sub-basin up into quadrants. And ideally, we wanted to have one RMS well in each quadrant. I don't know exactly why. I think we just couldn't find a good well in that southwest quadrant. So I think at one point we were hoping we could get a well installed in that area. But for the most part, we've got a pretty good historic record for those other wells that you can kind of see with the long name next to them. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through kind of the hydrographs, and you might have to toggle back and forth between the map and the hydrograph just so you can kind of see where that is. So if you go to the next one. So this is R001M. I don't know, Mitchell, can you go back and then maybe identify that with the cursors?
Yeah, that would be in the northeast.
Yeah, so this is the northeast map.
Here, it's this one here, in the northeast.
So if you go back now to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you go back to the next slide. So this is the hydrograph. And essentially just to kind of walk through folks through it, maybe if you're not familiar, we've got sort of the time on the x-axis. So starting back in 85, kind of going through, in this case, it'd be 2023. We've got elevations, that's groundwater elevation on sort of the left-hand y-axis. And there's benefits to looking at it in elevation, but also we decided let's add depth to water, because sometimes that's a little easier to visualize. So we've got elevation on the left side, and we've got depth of water on the right side. And then we've got these lines that kind of bounce up and down. Those are sort of the hydrographs. You can kind of see the black dots on there. That's sort of the measure point. And you can sort of see generally when the water levels, the elevation is high or the depth of water is shallow, that's generally the spring measurement. And then the lower they are, that's generally the fall measurement. And then you see the green line on there. That's the measurable objective. So that's really where we want to maintain water levels. And when we did this in the GSP, this is where we want to maintain the spring water levels, right? We want to kind of keep them in that range. And then the red line, that's the minimum threshold. We want to avoid that. So we don't want to drop below that too many times. Does that make sense? So you can say, yeah, this thing's bouncing around. Yes, and as we drop below the MT, but for the most part, if you look at that green line, look at water levels in the spring, which is the higher water levels. For the most part, those water levels haven't changed very much since probably the 1995-ish. Then also just sort of on the bottom, you'll see the boxes with colors. That represents the water year type. So it's critically dry. It's more of a sort of the reds, the browns, versus if it's a wetter year, it's sort of the cooler colors, the blues. So it kind of gives you a sense of, hey, why are water levels changing so much? Is it a factor of pumping, or is it a factor of sort of the environmental climate? So we need to factor that into it, right? Because we can't control climate. All we can really control is pumping. That makes sense?
So the MO, the green line is a spring reading, right?
Correct.
And the MT is a fall reading?
No, in this example, we want the MT, we set it at the spring level.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
But they told us to do fall.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're
So
gonna have to.
it won't change the position of the line. It just changes when we actually measure it.
But it might drop the MO. I mean, because if we set, if we want the MO to be set lower to represent the fall, we need to drop that line down to about 40 feet.
Yeah,
So,
I see.
But if you visualize,
We'll be moving both of them when we switch them, right? That's what you're saying.
we need to make that decision. I mean, you don't want to have the MO at spring and the MT at the fall. You probably just want to have them both at the fall.
But in that case, both lines would move down
Right.
equally.
Right. And again, it's a little easier to visualize, but just look at the general trend of those hydrographs. This one, that doesn't change very much compared to some of these other areas we work in. So I would say this is a relatively stable well. And then we've got a couple extra ones. I don't know if you want to kind of go through those. I think this one we've had issues before in the past, but I mean, this is what is this 003M?
Yeah, this is gonna be in the northwest here.
Yeah. So if you kind of scroll down back to it. I mean, there's some larger swings there. They could be a pumping kind of induced swing. But again, we're aiming for that green line today, and we're trying to avoid going below that red line. So I'd say, it's not perfect, but we're not, I'd say generally, maybe the last year it decreased a little bit, but I mean, generally, you're kind of keeping that water level above that green line. Here's another one. I don't know if you want to kind of show where that is, but it's just a similar trend. We're not seeing huge changes. There's 6 total.
Yeah,
It says where it's at on the grid right under the title.
okay,
So it's in
southwest,
southwest,
yeah. Southwest group.
I mean, there's some basins out there that would kill for these hydrographs.
Mhm.
This is the north.
So that's the hydrograph. So that's just how water levels fluctuate up and down. Now we're going to talk about storage change. So, the bathtub goes up, water levels go up, the bathtub goes down, water levels go down. But we can actually calculate what that volume is. Why is that important? Because we're trying to come up with what is the sustainable yield of the subbasin? How much water can we pump out on average, maximum pumping that doesn't induce, some of these undesirable results. So again, this is just looking at, this is volume on the y-axis, and in this case, it's acre feet per year. And then we got a lot of bars. I'll kind of walk them through. So probably the most important one here to look at is groundwater pumping, which is sort of the orange line or the orange bar. And then also groundwater storage, which is the purple bar. So for the most part, groundwater pumping has been relatively stable. I would say probably since, I don't know, what is that, early 1990s. It hasn't really changed very much. And so what has changed, if you look at the purple bars, some years storage is up, water levels come up. Some years it goes down. Well, that's tied really to climate. So if you look at the x-axis, you'll see the years. And then in parentheses, you'll see like a D, a BN, a D, a W. That's sort of a wet period, a dry period. So again, you have to look at that because it's the environment that's causing those issues. It's not over pumping. And so that's the purple bar sort of in years, like last year, 2023, water levels were up, storage was up. And you can see storage was up almost about 7,000 acre feet last year. And then the black solid line, that's just a cumulative change. So, some years water levels, storage is up, some years it's down, but there's sort of, cumulatively how things have changed over the last, in this example, 35 years. It's changed, I think, by less than 1,000 acre feet over a 36-year period. So it's not very much, which averages what, 30 acre feet a year? It's not much. So that's one way to visualize that. If you go to the next slide. This is just sort of looking at where storage is sort of occurring, right? So as the water levels are coming up, storage is coming up. So you see sort of a color map there, a heat map, and you can kind of see the legend is sort of the reds are the negative. This is change per acre foot. So you can see in sort of those green area, let's go to the extreme, the green area, you're seeing on average anywhere from 1 to 1.5 acre feet per acre. Water levels are coming up, and that's what that results in. So you kind of add that up over the entire subbasin. That's where you come up with this over 7,000 acre feet in water year 2023. Water levels came up, storage came up. So this is an example. No worries. This is an example of that. This is what some of the subbasins in the Central Valley are doing. Water storage is up 7,000 feet last year. Okay, let's say we have a drought next year. That's going to drop by 10,000 acre feet. Could we take that 7,000 acre feet and could we put it somewhere to offset when we do have a dry year? That's the sort of the concept with projects and management actions. Because right now you left 7,000 acre feet on the table last year. That's gone, right? It's gone. You're not going to be able to get it back. But when you hit a dry year, you're going to be in the whole 7,000 acre feet. So wouldn't it be nice if you could sort of get that water and store it somewhere, or at least characterize it so it's not moving off site or flowing into the lake or whatever. So that's the concept of this sort of balancing out for these dry periods.
How is it in storage in a surplus year and then not there?
Yeah.
Where's it go?
The water?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's either it's leaving the subbase, and I think it's probably hidden underneath the lake.
I see.
Yeah.
So this is the map created from the model?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Based on the observations?
Correct.
Okay.
So how do you store it? You store it in a dam? Is that what you're talking about?
I think, that's expensive because you got to take it out and then put it somewhere. I think, kind of depending on sort of the hydrostratigraphy, other areas where you could sort of maybe, bank that water. I guess you probably have to take it out and store it somewhere. You could put it in a reservoir. So yeah, you have to physically capture it and put it somewhere.
Is it problematic? You have 7,000 at the end of the season. So I guess then at the end of that season, you pump the hell out of it and get it out of there, or,
But you could take 7,000 acre feet out of this subbasin, and it would not impact. It would essentially make your storage change zero. This is plus or minus 20% or something.
when's the end of the water year?
September 30th.
Okay, so you'd have to be pulling it out in end of September.
Yeah. You take it out slowly over the year. There's ways to do it, so.
You don't know what you have until the end of the year, really. When you get
Yeah.
close, you start to know.
Yeah, come April, you know what it's gonna look like. April, May, you know.
Is that controversial to be putting in more storage when they're taking dams down? I'm just for the hitch or anything, just throwing that out.
In 20 years, I think you guys will be okay. In 20 years, you have to do whatever you can to be sustainable. So, it's like, if it's storing it in a dam, it's expensive. But a lot of folks are storing it underground. Or you sort of convert more to surface water sometimes in those wet years and don't pump as much. That's another option.
Well, and I think like this could be tied into existing projects, right? Something that we've heard a lot of is like raising the Highland Springs Dam.
Correct.
That would be a way to potentially capture 7,000 more acre feet of water without creating an additional structure or dam.
That project's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It's scoped for 1,100 acre feet more, but we're dealing with a lot of water rights issues with that. So
So
water rights is a big thing.
I think earlier you said the groundwater is flowing from north to south.
Yes. No, sorry, I meant the other way around. Yeah, what am I talking
Yeah.
about? The other way around.
Okay, so
What's happening at the creek there with red?
Yeah, so what that's showing in that area is we're seeing water levels decrease by, half a foot per acre.
Is that
Happening.
Adobe, yeah.
Yeah.
Right at Highway 29.
Which is right where we're gonna have a monitoring well coming soon, which is really cool. All right.
This is something, it's very similar, there's a lot more inputs into this. I mean, but essentially what you're looking at here is it summarizes up groundwater storage, domestic pumping, municipal pumping, stream leakage, flows out the Scott subbase, Scotts Valley subbasin, outside inflows, ag pumping, the fluxes from the lake. So I mean, again, this is all modeled, not perfect, but this is just something that's required for the complete water budget. This is just something, again, we're looking at here is sort of, estimating groundwater pumping in this case per section. So the kind of the color code sort of shows you that the green areas, less pumping, the yellows and the oranges, or maybe the salmons is more pumping. It gives you sort of an estimate per acre foot. And then the table here kind of summarizes up groundwater use by sector. So, sometimes we don't have these measured values. I mean, we get the reporting from some of the municipal folks, but on the ag side, we're not monitoring flow, we're not pumping, so we're using some sort of judgment on how much water they use. And so, I don't think the day will come here where you need to do metering, but in some areas they're starting to do metering. So these are, I would say they're a little bit more than a WAG, but this is the best we have. And you can kind of see, you kind of look at the total pumping, in this case from 2020 through 2023. I mean, it's not changing significantly. Water year 2022 was a wet year, so that's why there was less pumping.
And Eddie, last GSPAC meeting, I had talked about these numbers here, and we had a question about what is considered environmental plant groundwater uptake. So if you could answer that.
It's the groundwater dependent ecosystems. So they're uptaking that water.
Why would it vary so much year to year?
Precip. Yeah. If there's precipitation, if there's more precip, they'll rely on precip. If there's not, they'll take it up from groundwater.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so I think the next slide, this is the previous slide was looking at groundwater. This is total water by sector. And it's a little different. I think we include surface water in here. We're not seeing much surface water systems. Again, sometimes we reach out to some folks and that data doesn't get reported. But I think for purposes of reporting to DWR, this is kind of how we summarized it. This is, I think we're getting close. This is the periodic update. So, we mentioned this 5-year update that has to be done due in 2027. It's taken about 2 years to put these together, 18 months. This is what's required. Again, this is a guidance doc the DWR put out last year, specific to annual reports and periodic evaluations. So we don't really need to talk about plan amendments here, but this is sort of what's required. So again, it's not as comprehensive as the GSE. I would say for Big Valley, you're probably looking at, if we can convince Mitchell to help us out a little bit or help the consultant out you select, you're probably looking at 100 to 150 grand to put one of these together. And then it might get a little cheaper for the next one. We've got some templates, but so, I think on the annual reports, I mean, a typical annual report is going for, I think, anywhere from 40 to 50 grand. I think we're doing them for like 20 grand, and then you're doing some of the work. But just to kind of give you a sense of the scale and the cost.
So every year it's 20 to 50 grand then, depending on who does it?
Yeah, it was 26,000 this past year. Yeah. And that goes up a little bit every year.
You to do it too, right?
Well, my time, as well, which is coming out of our internal budget.
Yeah.
And there's no way around that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it has to happen every year. So we make it as cheap as possible, and it's a lot of coordination. Thankfully, Eddie and his team is willing to do some of the technical side of it, and then I do a lot of the writing side of it. Thankfully, we also have one to build off of, so it's a lot of just updating a lot of language and numbers and dates and things like that.
But the periodic will be different. It won't be as, kind of just updating.
Correct. That's going to be a
languages,
huge,
especially with the data gaps that we knew were coming. So.
correct.
So again, roughly 100 to 150 on the 5-year and 40 to 50 for each year. Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah. So before,
And right now, the 40 to 50 is being covered by your budgets,
correct.
but when we get to the big one, are we gonna need to raise money to do that?
Believe so. I believe we have some funds allocated for that 5-year periodic update. However, I don't know that specific number at this point. I know that we've been trying to save and pull from different areas to put in for that because, as you know, most of our departments funded through grants. There's very little groundwater money that comes from taxes to our department. So,
And there's some support that we can probably offer through what we do, because again, Lake County doesn't pay for Bridget's and my time of what we're doing, that we can include, because we are helping other basins as they start to develop their periodic updates.
Yeah. Luckily, we have a fantastic team that assists us. So it's not like reinventing the wheel or making a whole new one. Eddie works on a ton of ones that they're currently working on, and they're helping out other basins. So we have good hands to help us. Just kind of,
It helps to know what
Cost is
others are
what it
doing
is.
too, right?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
and it always helped when Eddie would say to everybody as we're developing the GSP, trust us, this is a really good scenario
Mhm.
for everything.
Yeah.
It's still hard, right? It's still tough to manage
Is
the
there
time and
General fund
cost.
money or any of the discretionary marijuana funds that could be?
We've
Well,
talked about that,
this
Scott.
project
Remember, we
might
talked
happen.
about that as part of the GSP, that was one of the avenues to
yeah,
look at.
that is something that I want to look more into, is potentially using cannabis funds to assist with this. There's some stuff that it's not necessarily going to be brought up in this meeting, but there's a potential watershed assessment funding that's kind of in the works right now for our department, and we may be able to utilize some of that. We'll have more on that at a later meeting. So, I know that next, Eddie, you had the
Do you
PMA.
wanna just kind of package it with what you're gonna cover?
So yeah, I'm gonna let you go ahead and talk about the financial stuff first, and then I have the PMAs in the next section that I'll cover.
Okay.
So with any of your set, but we have this one first. I forgot about this slide.
So really, this is just, I know there's been some questions about the GSP. I mean, it's been 2 years since I looked at it. I'm somewhat familiar with it. I think there were some questions that came up about the water level conversation. I think we've addressed that. Are there any other things that are kind of keeping people up at night? All in the GSP that you're dying to know? Why we decided made some of those decisions. I think some of you guys were involved with it, so hopefully you can help defend it if it's not a decision we should have made. But is there anything specific in the annual report? I do have a copy at the back, so if folks are really, really bored, maybe at the end, we can kind of go around it and have a conversation. If not, we can keep going, or whatever you all want to do.
I don't have any questions.
Yeah.
So, so I think because we have to, like, as you said, like sustainable by 2042.
Yeah.
42, right? So suppose, I think that the example which you gave, like that 7,000 acre feet, like which we have in storage, and we might be able to keep it up. Like if we want to, like, we store it, like what about the water rights? Like, do we keep it from the surface, or you're like, are we supposed to like pump it out and store it, or store it even before it gets into the groundwater?
I would say it's a combination, but if you can get the surface water when it's available, and there's, I'm not the expert on this, but I work with a firm that does this, actually for DWR, but looking at water rights and looking at specific types of permits where you can pull the water off without CEQA, without looking at water rights. So there's opportunities to do it. So I think it's some combination. I think in this subbasin, I think it would be primarily surface water.
Yeah.
But there's lots of options. I
There-
mean,
there are
that's the
options.
thing. Yeah, there's lots and lots of different options.
And I think in general, when we talk about lost water, it's usually uncaptured rainwater. Like usually, in a
Runoff,
larger
yeah.
context,
I
yeah.
mean, everything starts as precip,
Yeah.
right? And that's what's feeding the system.
Right.
So,
And we do have a update. Angela's presentation that's coming up shortly is talking about stormwater capture and reuse stuff, which is one of our PMAs. So we'll be touching a little bit on that. All right. Well, I'll let Eddie talk about this a little bit before we go into this kind of a background on some financial sustainability. And then I'll be diving into the project management actions after that, and kind of what has been funded through other sources and what currently isn't funded and that we need to seek funding for. So.
Okay. So this is, that's fine, yeah, whatever, it's what we want. This is sort of a thing that a lot of GSAs are going through now, where it's like, okay, we've kind of, most of the GSP development was funded by grants. The annual reports, some have been fortunate enough to get grants to fund them, the periodic updates the same, but there's a lot of agencies out there that didn't get the funding. And so it's like, you know, the message we're hearing from the state is, hey, guys, at some point, you kind of need to be financially sustainable, okay? So how can that happen? Well, what most folks are looking at is it's a fee, it's a parcel tax essentially. And there's different ways to do it, but I just thought I'd walk you through. These are some sort of ideas that, there's some concepts that we've been working on. So this is just really a summary of kind of what's expected of we'll blame Mitchell for this, on what he needs to do. And again, it's sustainability in 2042, but this is not gonna stop in 2042. It's gonna keep going. You know, I don't know if the periodic updates are gonna be there, but if we're sustainable in 42, maybe it's just an annual report kind of thing. I don't know. Quinn, you'll still be around, probably. I'll be retired by then. So you can kind of figure that out. But anyway, these are sort of things that need to continue to happen, right? And the idea is if we could get it funded, if we could get the funding in place, so by 2042, we're sustainable. We've evaluated our data gaps, and we feel like we've got a better handle of the data gaps. And then now it's just we're kind of in cruise control and kind of maintaining the sub-basin sustainability. So kind of going back to the next slide, I think I'll go to the next slide. So specific to costs, okay, and you all are familiar with, you've got sort of GSA operational costs, Sigma compliance costs, projects and management actions, which really kind of rolls into why is it important to have financial sustainability, okay? And so these are sort of the pillars of what's needed to kind of make sure that you're kind of successful and sustainable financially kind of moving into the future. And you can kind of see each of the quadrants have a description of what they are. Typically, GSA operational costs are covered by the county. Some agencies have actually incorporated that into their fee. Sigma compliance, that's the one that's expensive. So, you know, at some point, I think we've provided this to you, maybe not, but we've given you sort of a sense of what are the annual costs going to be, what are the 5-year costs going to be. Yeah. And so I think kind of realistically, this is the piece that you need to kind of figure out. When you start bringing in projects and management actions, it's expensive. I really don't think you want to burden the taxpayers to foot the bill for these projects and management actions.
And they have to be specified up front, clearly, and be part of it.
Yeah.
Really quickly, we had the ad hoc for financial stuff that we did as our final step before we submitted the GSP. So that does exist if anybody wanted to go back and look at how kind of we looked at preliminary, because Eddie did bring that. He did bring some of those like projections. And
I think it's in the GSP.
I believe it's in the
Yeah.
GSP.
Yeah.
So you get a sense of what that cost is. I don't know what it is. I could probably.
So you're talking about a parcel tax on people who live in the Big Valley or?
We were talking about what would it cost to run all of this. I don't think we ever took the step of separating out like, okay, who's going to bear that? How's that going to work? We
Well, he
knew that
just
the
said something about a parcel tax.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, that's one.
lots of
that's one way.
options.
That's
It's
one
one
way.
way. There's
Yeah.
lots of different, there's, 218, 26, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. And we talked preliminary about the costs to support it, but not necessarily what would happen
This is
out of
probably
it.
the biggest elephant in the room is how much is it gonna cost?
Sure. And I remember that subcommittee meeting that we had here was pretty, intense conversations about us trying to figure that out.
And I'll get a number for you in a sec. Yeah, I mean, just to again, tell you what other counties are doing. Some are doing it, a tax. I'll call it, they say it's a fee. Okay, so the fee is based on the acreage, and the fee can be based on just a flat acreage. You can have it tiered, so you can say, hey, if you're using, if you're not irrigating, you're going to pay this fee. If you're irrigating with surface water, you're going to pay this fee. And if you're going to irrigate with groundwater, you're going to pay this fee. And typically it's tiered, so pump more groundwater. I mean, the groundwater fee is generally the highest. That's one idea. One is a flat fee. There's pros and cons to that. We'll go crazier. Some folks are going to come up with a wellhead tax. So they're going to base it on the diameter of the casing of the well. Okay, so the larger the diameter, the thought is you're pumping more water, you're causing more issues in the basin, they're going to tax you more. So there's different options. And I think at some point we can bring all these details back to you. But the idea is try to come up with a financial sustainability model. That's the main concept here.
The dollar amounts for those fees are all over the board,
Yeah,
like
right.
all over the board,
Right.
like $2 for, a 1 acre parcel up to like some of them are somewhat significant. And it was all determined locally by the groups who were trying to determine how to be financially sustainable.
So that's collected through property tax bills, basically.
That's how they're doing it.
Yeah.
Most of these counties.
Most of them.
Yeah, it's a-
Does that make it a special district?
Well, I mean, there's an option of that, but like most of them are going the 218, the Prop 218 process, where it's just, it has to be the 51% have to say no, that they don't want it. So it's kind of, ushered in. But there's a lot of work that happens locally, collectively to figure things out before you even get to that stage. So,
Really tough sell too.
yeah.
If you do it to 18.
Yeah. And we've had all over the board experiences of it, high ag places that have known that there would be something that wouldn't get out in front of it to really dive into it, to people who feel like they've been completely broadsided and like, you just show up to something and it's like, I just inherited this kind of thing.
Right.
So best to have those conversations early and very open and, kind of work through it. So.
But again, that component of funding would be targeting the Sigma compliance costs.
I mean, my recommendation was somebody could show you the numbers, but you could say, hey, for compliance, it's gonna be $3 an acre. You wanna bring in projects, it's gonna be $30 an acre. I mean, that's, I mean, not 30, maybe 10. So I mean, it's a significant cost.
Yeah. And the projects gets tricky because once you commit to what those are going to support, it has to be for that. It's not like, oh, just this chunk of 40% of it's going to be towards projects and whatever they're going to be.
Yeah.
You have to identify and it has to adhere to that very clearly. So there is a lot of work that goes in up front to do that.
I think the most successful models I've seen, it's where, compliance is covered with the fee, and then projects and management actions are kind of either dealt with grants or the stakeholders that are in that area. Hey, if you could convince this person to use surface water instead of groundwater or bank surface water, there's some incentive. And so I think it's sort of more project specific, and within that project, that's your benefit, so you should support that. That's kind of how I think it is the most fair. This is just kind of looking, you've seen this before. It's just sort of, again, putting it in the context of sort of funding. And this is an example of kind of, hey, GSP has been adopted. If you started, in this example, I think it was this year sometime, if you wanted to kind of go through this process, it generally takes, I think the shortest one I've seen is about 4 months to kind of go through the process. Because you got to get it on the tax roll, which I think is in August. So if you started, January next year, you could get it done by August. You got to get it on the tax roll. If you decided to go with sort of a partial tax or a user fee. And there's a lot of, I've learned a lot of lessons. It's all about outreach. You've got to get in front of the public. The Farm Bureau, don't ignore them or you get sued. You got to do the outreach and let folks know, hey, here's the benefit of this. Because it's not the horse and the stick kind of thing or the carrot and stick, but it's almost like if we don't do this, not Quinn, but DWR is going to come in and it's going to be painful for a while. And then the idea is they're going to get us back up to speed and then kind of turn it back to the 8. But you don't want to go down that route. Actually, it wouldn't be DWR, it'd be the state board, but you don't want to go down that. Because they're coming in
there are basins
with
that are
a
going
magnifying glass.
Yeah.
And it's not just about some of the entities or the items that we talked about. They're coming in and it's not fun. So I would recommend you keep away from that.
And one other thing that I want to put in there too is that we also looked at doing that and assessing it just in Big Valley versus the county overall. And there were pros and cons to both of those things of kind of like getting out in front of any other kind of groundwater type things you'd be doing. There's only one other basin in the entire county that's a low priority basin. So, but overall for the county, so just a ton of considerations, lots of outreach, lots of discussion internally amongst folks too.
So you're looking for a recommendation from this committee on how this would.
I think right now what we're trying to do is lay out all of the options and the things and bring to bear, like, what are the things to work through? Because that's important. I know the question last time we met was, why do we meet? Why do we have to still meet? And so I think we'd love it if you come away from this meeting saying, that's why there needs to be input in the working through of that. I don't think there's any action out of this meeting that we're asking for anyone. More of just apprising you kind of what it all is.
This is the big deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this and the projects too, you know, you all did something really miraculous in that in the GSP, you actually tiered your projects and management actions. We actually had a whole meeting just about that. There were a ton of them that did that after the GSP was submitted and have really struggled with that in a lot of different ways, like, right? Because you have different factions who are pro one project and not another. So you already are kind of ahead of game in some of that. And I know that you're going to talk about some of
Yes.
those PMAs.
Yeah.
But, and some of them have already started to be enacted, right, and to be supported
Yeah.
in different ways. And the projects are great because they're kind of the big grant funder, like pieces where you could leverage some other funding and things like that. But you did a really good job on your GSP, and it's a sustainable basin. Just need to keep it that way. I mean, a lot of good news.
I'll touch on this really quickly. So this is just sort of the process. So you say, okay, we need a fee. What does it look like? So the first box here is like, okay, what is the revenue needs? So again, there were some estimates that were included in the GSP. I'm kind of looking at this. This is just the annual costs. It's varied from about 130 up to about 250. But I would say dust that off, refresh it. We can hopefully get it down a little bit. So let's establish what those revenue needs need to be.
So 130,000?
I would say, well, this is just what was in the GSP 2 years ago.
I'm just saying 130,
Yeah.
250.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
Just getting clarification.
Yep.
So the thought was, and what we've seen in other sub basins is you get a group together, we get a table going, and we put together a 5-year revenue projection. And these are the items that will be covered in that 5-year revenue projection. Okay, so then we get everybody to agree, this is how much money we need. That's really important to agree on that. And then we start talking about cost allocation. So how do we apportion those costs? And there's different ways to do it. I mentioned that, you know, based on user type, so surface water, groundwater, dry land user, domestic, municipality, there's different ways to kind of tier it. But we can't get into any of that. Trust me, we tried this before you all agree and sign in blood. This is the number we need to have over the next 5 years. Okay, and we'll include in that 5-year projection the annual reports, the periodic update, the 5-year update, and then you guys can make a decision on, hey, do you want to have any money in here for projects and management actions? But you'll see pretty quickly, you start factoring in projects and management actions, anything over 150,000, 100,000, it really adds up, especially in a small sub-basin like that. But that's sort of the process. So then once you agree on the cost allocation, then you start diving into the fee options on how you're going to sort of generate those revenues. And then that kind of gets back into, you know, public notifications. I mean, I can't overestimate how important that is. Flyers, mailers, it's expensive. I mean, to go through this process, it's, you know, it's I'll say 100,000, but if you skimp on outreach and engagement, it'll be 200,000. So I can't stress the importance of engagement and outreach, because yeah, I learned the lesson the hard way on that. So this is sort of the process, the flow that would be required.
Yeah, and I also want to point out too that like on the projections, when we talk about some of those really high per parcel fees, some of the projections actually included legal fees as part of it. Some are very significant portions of their 5-year projections are legal fees because they're under active litigation or whatever it is. So there's those things to factor into.
Yeah, I think this is, we're hoping for no challenges, but we had a 10 to 20 grand for legal fees. There's sub basins that were that it's you know,
Several,
100,000,
yeah,
200,000
several 100,000.
because of lawsuits. So that's sort of an overview of the process. I think we're kind of done on that.
Okay.
This is, yeah, I wouldn't kind of worry about that. I think we just kind of, this is just an example of how that might work. You know, if you kind of started today, you know, you're looking at, you know, probably, you know, the fee would hit the county's role, the tax assessor's role in 2025. It takes, I mean, if you have a year, it's great. You can do it in 6 months. It's expedited, it's rushed, and then you kind of have to skimp on outreach and just don't do it.
What's involved in getting a proposed fee approved, like that thing that happens in April? Who approves it? Is it
The voters.
the voters? So
Yeah.
this goes on a ballot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's I mean, it's a game because it's like they don't do a Prop 26, which would require 51%. Well, you can, would require 51% of the voters to approve it. They do a Prop 218, so you have to have 51% of the voters not approve it. So if you don't have the voters show up to not approve it, then it'll pass. You know, it doesn't seem right to me, but that's I would say
It's not affirmative. It's
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. Yeah, and that's how they're getting these things through. Now, there's legal challenges going on today about that. But I mean, this is how they're doing it. If you want to follow that methodology.
Well, we'll move into agenda item 4.2, which is the project and management actions. And I would like to thank Eddie so much for being here and assisting us. He has a much deeper depth of knowledge on all the things in our GSP, so it's great to have him here. So in the GSP, there was, as Christia mentioned, that you guys had already prioritized, and there was like a tier list. And so we had a tier 1A, which is GSA, which will be implemented in full to reach sustainability. Tier 1B, which is the lead GSA, tier 2, and tier 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of the breakdowns of the ones that you guys had chosen to be in those different tiers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about them and which ones are basically being funded through other sources. I don't have the specific sources on hand right now. Angela knows quite a bit about some of the other funds that are happening, so I may reach out to her about some, or Angela, feel free to reach out if you see one that you know is funded through a specific type of grant. So we'll go into the tier 1B. Actually, before we do that, yeah, there are no tier 1A PMAs identified in November 2021. So we went straight. So there wasn't any that needed to be implemented to reach sustainability. So we're going to hop right on down to tier 1B. So at the top, we have the expand well monitoring. So this is a really difficult one. It really comes down to a lot of willing landowners, and with the GSP and SIGMA, as well as the State Water Resource Control Board information order, we've been losing a number of people that are willing, because it's all a volunteer basis at this point. There's been a lot that are unwilling to allow us onto their property to continue monitoring, regardless if it's been happening since the 60s, 70s. TSS, the technical support services, that is assisting this in a sense, but it also touches on a lot of different things. So that's why we really love the technical support, which is the monitoring wells that DWR has willingly been able to assist us with. So the next one is improve understanding of relationships between surface water and groundwater. That section, as I just mentioned with the TSS, that's going to significantly assist us in understanding that, specifically Adobe Creek and Kelsey Creek, which is happening. And we're going to have an update from Quinn in a little bit, as well as the study that the water board is doing right now with the information order. I'm really looking forward to working with them and getting that data, regardless if it's only a 1-year period that they're doing that study. It's going to be great to know and understand some more from that. So that's something that, while it'd be great to know more, I think there's a lot of good steps and other funding things that are happening in that.
And the DWR guidance that will come forward to that, I think will be super helpful in kind of at least not, a lot of the stuff early on, you have to kind of like think through and what are they going to think? What are they going to say? But like having that direct guidance, I think will really help pinpoint it.
Yeah. So moving on to the next one is the RMS wells water quality. Currently, our district does fund a quarterly sampling of these wells. It's total dissolved solids. We do some metals, but it's very limited. It's quarterly. We do 6 wells, I believe, every quarter. So the district is currently taking on that funding to implement that tier.
So does that need to be expanded, or is that just continued?
Basically just continued. Yeah. I think it's not a huge burden on our
We're not
district.
finding anything that's alarming. Why would we want to expand it anyway?
Yeah, and it's also comes down to the willing landowners too, right? That are willing to, I mean, a lot of people want to know what's happening in their water as far as water quality. I'd love to, we have 10 wells that we monitor every month for our plan. I would love to do all 10 of those, but that I don't really see going beyond that. I don't see any purpose for it. And we pinpoint different locations throughout, so. The next one is the update and refine the BV, the integrated hydrologic model. So as you know, the state did an AEM study on the Big Valley Basin. There were a number of things, and maybe Quinn can touch on that a little bit. I don't know how involved you were with that, but they did a little bit, and that data has finally come out. So that will be something that's looking to be updated in the 2027 GSP update. So that one we don't really need to worry about too much. We also, while it's not focusing on Big Valley, we just finalized some paperwork for an AEM study of all of the groundwater basins within the county. And so I do want to like maybe look into some areas in Big Valley that we weren't able to get prior and include that, but we will be looking at Scotts Valley, the Upper Lake Aquifer, the Koyama, I can never say, Koyama Aquifer down in Middletown. So that's kind of covered in another funding sense. The domestic well management program, and that one's like the multi-project. You can read it up here. It's on the top right. Basically well inventory, education outreach, coordination on dry well reporting systems, and the well mitigation program. We do not have any funding for that currently, and that's something that we would need to seek out if we wanted to pursue that. These were identified, so is that what you talked about?
Yeah,
Like,
and did you have something? I have something.
No,
as well.
I think you can tap into that drought funding.
It's-
Support some of that.
Yes, so there's a number of things that can support that. There's
Okay.
also some stuff afoot from the statewide overlay of outreach and like guidance and help that might be able to help with that. But one of the things that we did when we had some extra money left over from the GSP development, we did get approval. So while Eddie said close your ears, we did get approval for it. Was we started to do a domestic well program overall. So there is a framework and structure for the beginnings of that.
okay,
For here. So there was some work that had been done for that. And I do think you're going to, there's no single bigger project overall that GSAs are dealing with than that particular issue. So I think you're going to see a lot of help and resources from other folks too.
all right.
So
The next one on there is the created permanent Big Valley GSA website that has been created. It's currently hosted on our county website, the water resources page. So that wasn't a huge burden. Public outreach, that's a big one. Our district continues to outreach. We have these meetings, they're open to the public. We have Stantec, who is a fantastic resource for a lot of outreach material and helping us draft that stuff.
and that is when it says 45,000 per year, you're getting that and then some for free from us as support, the facilitation support services that DWR provides. So
All right.
Is any of this just put in the local paper or anything so people know that we're meeting?
It's on the public agenda and we posted it on our website.
yeah, we'll be a
things like
board of
that.
supervisors update that Mitchell's going to do here pretty soon to kind of give, and that was fairly, Marina had done that regularly for them to kind of update them, and they're keeping tabs on it.
Yeah.
They check in.
If you go around and talk to anybody, have they ever heard of this?
I don't know, I seem to talk to people that I know about it because they're interested in what's going
I'm
on,
just
but I haven't
wondering
really.
how many.
I would also say, Val, I think there's a number of water quality and use related programs happening right now.
Right.
So I'd say, at least in my office, the most consistent response that I get is that people have them mixed up. Like what's what, that's really
Right.
confusing to
Yeah.
everybody with how many efforts and different programs are occurring
I'm just
simultaneously
wondering how-
right now.
I mean, it's nice to have stuff on the website and on the county site, but if I tell anybody what I'm doing here, they've never.
Yeah, well, when we really got that popped up is when we were doing the GSP. Remember, that was the early stages of Sonoma starting to look at the fees, like the and big fees. And so that bled into, and the people, the members of the public came here and were saying, well, we hear, just in the county over, this is what they're doing. And that's, I'll tell you, the fees drives everyone to the table type thing. But so that's part of that proactive that Eddie was talking about, proactively getting out and involved to say, these are some real successes against your PMAs that you've already made. And the fact that the GSP was approved. So there's definitely some successes. And I know that Mitchell plans to hit on that with the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah.
And maybe it can trickle out of that or do some proactive.
And
stuff.
I would love to do more with that. However, I am a one-man band and this is only about 30% of my position of things that I do on a day-to-day basis. And so as much as I'd love to focus and be able to go out and reach out with public outreach is just really difficult for us. I know drought has an option. There's a lot of public outreach with the drought stuff that's happening here at the county, and maybe that can, GSPAC and groundwater can infiltrate some of that and the importance of it.
Do you want to say that in an upcoming contract that we're working with Lake County on, we'll be able to support with a public workshop? And so that'll be a way that we can more directly reach out to members of the public as well. and through that also hear about what would be better ways for the members of the public to continue to stay engaged. So that'll be
Drought
part of our
specific,
scope.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the intersection is there. But to
Yeah.
Rebecca's comment is right on. People don't separate this out. It's water. It's all
I'd say
water.
there'd be
Right.
a lot of disinformation if this isn't put out on.
Sure,
all outlets.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if the first they hear of it is they're gonna get taxed on their parcel, that,
Yeah.
you know, it's never good to have that be the first thing that they get, so.
So I think what probably she is mentioning is saying like we are doing all this meeting, we are posting it, we are doing it on our part, which is required on some extent by the state. But there are people like who don't show up for the meeting or don't take like a proactive measure to get all this information. But they would be like directly impacted by this. So somehow like whether a letter goes to them, like saying they know about it so they can inquire more. Because
Yeah.
there might be a lot of people out there like who have no idea.
We do have a
That's the
listserv.
First time they're gonna
Would
get like when they got informed saying, okay, this is a new tax or new fees coming up for
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
the interested parties list that I know.
Yeah, we
Mitchell's kind of
have-
mentioned
we
is
have
a
an- yeah.
requirement of Sigma.
I have
It
a
is.
question maybe for Angela, and she can let me know if this is like totally out of the picture. But it seems like there could be an opportunity for a Lady of the Lake.
Mhm.
Oh,
feature,
absolutely.
Right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's something that people generally read related to water issues.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's an opportunity there. Angela, you can kick me
And I
out
want,
if
yeah,
you don't want to do that.
Yeah, I would welcome that. And I could co-write some stuff, you know, with Mitchell or, you know, Stantec. And I've always offered that Water Quality Wednesdays could also house a discussion on this. And then that's like an information, you know, that's about 20 to 40 minutes with question and answer. It's usually obviously Wednesdays in the evening, but it does go out on PEG TV and then we record it. And then it's always available on our YouTube channel. Always available on our website. It goes out on Facebook Live. The county supports it and it goes out on their Facebook Live when we have it. And then they always share it. It gets pretty wide use. And then that's also like a smaller tidbit of information that people can start and stop, you know, in between prepping dinner and chasing the kid. And then be able to refer to it back later. And it's shareable. And that's also another way that I like, at least for my programs, I like to share that information out. And definitely welcome to have the groundwater topic included in that. And also Lady of the Lake would totally be great too.
So just a quick question. So how many parcel or how many people we are talking about impacted by this basin? Or have this property? Any rough idea?
I don't have the number on the top of my head. I can get that to you, but it's a significant amount are agricultural users. And then domestic well users, obviously, you can't really charge them for, typically it's not used.
the de
And
minimis.
yeah, the de minimis
Mm.
users. So anything under 3 acre-feet a year, I believe, is what's considered de minimis. So I'd have to get back to you on that and let you know. I can bring that at the next meeting.
Yeah, and I see like some of the area on that are like the mountainous up there, so I don't know whether are we charging them? Because most of the basin out there is like where the valley is, like that's where most people are using the water,
Mhm.
so there is like a lot of water used there, but the actual number of people like who are using it might be very limited, so
Yeah, it's,
based on like the price we are putting out, like maybe I don't know like how that would be, because these up in the mountain, I'm assuming they're not using a whole lot of water.
Yeah, and before I can honestly say that I think Marina was very focused on the potential of the whole county bearing it in an effort to say that groundwater overall for the county was going to, you know, just kind of hedging their bets kind of thing. So it's never very specific of, oh, you know, and drilling into just it being Big Valley.
Yeah.
But we can definitely, you know, get those numbers and figure that out. And that's part of the process that Eddie was talking about. When you start to do the projections, there's the projections of how much money do we need, but then how do we go about this? And that's digging into, that can go forever,
Yeah.
like infinity. Yeah. We're in the middle of that with 3 other basins right now. And it's unbelievable, like how real granular we can get, and then open ET, and you bring in all the other different pieces of it too. So.
yeah. Well, we'll move on to the tier 2 projects and management actions. So these are a little bit lower priority. No problem. Oh, wait.
It was lead-in music.
Yeah, it was.
The atmospheric cue. Here we are.
And so the big one at the top is implement Adobe Creek conjunctive use, which has now recently been renamed to Highland Springs conjunctive use. This is something that the district has secured funding for through WCB grant, the Wildlife Conservation Board. We've received a number of money of that, and we're looking at updating that. We're working through some water rights things right now, and we're about to send out the RFQ for that. But we have a significant amount of funding for that. The next one is the Kelsey Creek Detention Structure Rehabilitation. The district has set aside some funding to rehabilitate that structure. However, we have not reached out to put an RFP or anything like that for a consultant to repair that yet. The next one going down the list is the improved water demand estimates. This is one that we do not have any funding for, and it's something that I would absolutely love to seek funding for, as I've recently had some contact with the Cannabis Task Force, and they were asking me basically, does the GSA have a specific set of sustainable yield for cannabis operations or things like that? And I basically had to tell her, like, we don't at this point. We haven't had the funding to be able to determine that. So that's something that I think is really big that we don't have any funding for. And I don't know if there's any type of grant funding that would seek that. So that's one. The next one is recharge locations. That's also one that we don't have any funding for. There's a whole lot that goes into that. I don't even want to go. That would take a lot of time with water rights and things like that. We've been dealing with the water board on a number of things, and they have firmly reminded us that we were in the Delta watershed and that a lot of people downstream also have priority to water rights here. So that would be a lengthy battle.
There are some other things that are coming up too related to recharge and flood that I think would be really appropriate for that. And we'll keep you in mind as those things unfold.
Okay.
And we, like, towards the end of the year, we might know a little bit more about that.
All right. And the next one is stormwater capture and reuse. And Angela will actually be speaking on this right after I'm done with this PMAs. And so she can dive into how different grant funds can assist with this PMA. And then the next one is the video survey. That also we do not have any funding for.
Quinn, can we tap into DWR? Do you guys get a camera?
Yeah, so our data collection and management section does have 2 well cameras. As far as Lake County submitting a formal request saying we come video all these wells, I don't know if that would have to run through technical support services or some other channel. I just don't know if they have the blanket funding to video whichever wells they get requested to do, but I will make a note of that.
What is the purpose of this? To find out where the screens are?
This gives you a good idea of where screen intervals are. It can give you a good idea of other well constructions, the well open hole below the screen interval. Does it have an actual screen, or is it just the casing ends after 40 feet? And in cases where you're investigating dry wells, like why this well might have gone dry, it can tell you if it collapsed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I may have not gone to the next page.
So you're
Few of those.
using DWR cameras for that?
Yes, we have 2 cameras. We have a little small handheld one that looks very similar to an electronic sounder, so it's just a little hand crank.
Mhm.
And then there's a much bigger one for very, very deep wells. Probably wouldn't need to get used here in Lake County because most of the wells are a lot shallower. But that one involves like a truck and a generator and a power station and stuff like that. So we have 2 cameras and it's a possibility, but I'm not sure what it would involve.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna be a little honest here. I'm getting lost in the weeds here, what county's paying for. Do you feel that way, Dave? Or is that just
All of these things are proposed projects, Val, but nothing that's specifically going to happen. These are things that
I understand. It's just
Yeah.
sort of I'm getting lost in it all. And,
Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
lot to
there's-
So I don't
hold.
know
It
how I'm
is.
supposed to make a decision. of
Yeah,
any kind ever.
yeah. There,
Yeah.
as far as projects are concerned, any decisions that would happen would be very specific meetings to talk about them or to talk about the funding that would be available to them, that type of thing. I think this is more a broad picture,
Yeah.
here's what we put in the GSP, than anything that you're going to be asked to take a stand on at this point. So, but I think the key takeaway for this is Mitchell's going over the actual actions that have taken place, that, the TSS has come in to do it. The facilitation support services has ponied up money. So it's not as if you're saying, great, we have all these projects and nothing's getting done. There has been stuff done, which is really great, right?
Yeah.
Like you've made
So,
progress.
So these project management action has been identified in GSP.
Correct.
And up to, are we obligated to achieve that?
You were not.
Up to what year, like which project, if we want to implement some of them, which year we have to,
Undefined.
that's not.
Yeah, undefined. Yeah, the GSP asked you to identify them and to look at, how they might impact the sustainability or promote through it.
Yeah.
But that can change. The entirety of them can change by the time you get to the
So,
periodic update.
so there is a project on that saying Adobe Creek Conjunctive Use Project. How did we came in to keep that project under this GSP? Because I'm just getting up to speed with all the projects. So as I understand, like that project was started in 2001, which is way before
Correct.
this groundwater thing came into picture. So how did we went from a project which was totally different and then coming that project to this GSP?
Yeah, grandfathered in, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was just a process, and you can probably speak to that better of just how we evaluated that against it. It was part of the GSP process is to look at what are the options, what are the logical options.
What has been done in the past and
Correct.
taking
Yeah.
it from there and clubbing it together, saying,
Yep.
okay, this might
Yep.
fit in GSP.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
basically, I guess the idea behind that is like that project might be something which is beneficial for the groundwater. or
Correct.
like
It
the
makes
recharge.
sense. Yes, correct.
Yeah, so I think that's the other thing, because in order for that project to move forward, we need to have certain water right, which we are having difficulty with.
Right.
And probably that reason, I think it might be identified here because there was like a major portion of that water right was allocated for a groundwater recharge. So.
Correct.
And so basically this is a wish list.
Yeah.
And it can change. It was to show them that you had been thoughtful, show DWR that you had been thoughtful in thinking what exists and how it might relate to the overall program. That will change through time. As you know more, let's say some major funding pokes up about something that's not in there. All of a sudden it's like, hey, that can count, right? I work with the Sacramento Water Bank and work with two different subbasins with lots of different GSAs in it. And we're working through that, right? That was an identified project, but how it was going to work and how it was going to contribute, all of that stuff is over time coming out.
And once we have this plan approved, it's already approved.
It is
It's already
approved,
approved.
yes.
Yeah.
So does that put us in a situation that we are more likely to get funding for these projects?
Oh, for sure. I think that
Okay.
you've identified those projects for sure makes it more
And-
ripe for
and this
funding.
funding would be specifically for GSAs, or is it like any other funding you go out there and find it out of funding?
I think that it could be funding from a variety of sources, and it doesn't have to be necessarily GSA specific. If the project were something that could be done, like I'm thinking about one particular basin that we work in, that it's a recharge project, but it's done through individual ag folks who on their particular parcel want to do a pilot study or something like that. And so like they have been able to secure different types of funding. So it just kind of depends. There's lots of variables to it. So you're not married to it. It was a good wish list. It can
Yeah.
still stay there. But to Val's point, you don't have to take action on any of these today, tomorrow, or otherwise. It's just something for us to work through.
Yeah.
I think where I'm getting confused is like some things have been done, some things we may have a grant for, or however.
Mhm.
Correct.
You get money.
Sure.
And so nothing's clear to me right now is what's not There's a part of me that just wants to say, what's not covered and how much money do we need to come up? with?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, as I understood, maybe just to give you an idea,
Yeah.
maybe if that, like, you can say like whether that's a good understanding for that or not. So we have a like wish list of the projects we want to do.
Right,
And out of that, like, we are trying to get like as many as we can complete. And for some of them, like as a watershed protection district, we have gone out and seek like a funding source, whether we can, what we can get. And whatever you see on that numbers out there, that's some of them we have received, but some of them we are still looking, sir, where we can get those funding.
And Val, in the context of fees, which I think you're kind of trying to consider like the fees, because none of the projects are required, when we have a larger conversation about fees, we don't necessarily have to say
Yeah.
or incorporate any of these dollar amounts
Right.
into what we need to collect in revenue. Because these are not required projects, right? So we as a group could say, okay, we would love to complete some of these projects, but we're gonna do it all through grant funding or other funding opportunities. And we're not gonna burden the landowners in our area with that cost in addition
so
to
we will
the
be
compliance
making those
costs
decisions.
at a later
Yes,
date.
at a later date.
You will be
Yeah.
making you will be preparing the guidance for the Board of Supervisors, who is your sitting board, to make the
Okay,
decision.
that makes sense
Yeah.
to me somewhat, because
Yeah.
I was just.
Yeah.
getting-
And Angela has her hand
Yeah.
raised, so go ahead, Angela.
Thank you. I really enjoy this conversation. I have a suggestion at a future meeting to go through the tiered projects and add another column, because there has already been grant funds and outside funds that have actually met, if not addressed completing some of these projects, but partially completing them. And I would volunteer to be able to be a part of that, because it would really help you guys basically cross off a lot of these projects and have clear identification about the remaining needs for them. And so that'll really help you guys going forward, save you a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I was intending with this section, and it's just, we're a little behind on time, so I'm kind of rushing through it. So I'll get,
No, it's all good.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a
all
lot
good.
to hold, Val.
Yeah.
It's a lot to hold.
It's
Yeah.
good
I mean,
information.
basically, we're pushing our entire year-long planning and the GSP itself back into a refresh session, which this is, and it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
And I'll go through these tier 3 really quickly. Reestablish wetlands and riparian habitats. Angela can talk more on that, but at a later time. But like the Middle Creek project is a big one that's currently funded through other sources. We have a grant for primrose removal and tule restoration. That's something that's helping address that, as well as the potential Adobe Creek conjunctive use. Hitch passage data, that is a huge focus right now throughout a number of different entities, whether it's tribal or local or state. So that's something that's already being taken care of. Hitch migratory habits, that's also a big one that's being funded, and projects through not just our district, but tribes and local entities. And then the non-point source discharge is something that can, I believe, be adapted into the stormwater capture and reuse project. So with that, I will move it on over to agenda item 4.3. And Angela, I apologize, we're about 20 minutes behind on time. So if you could be as brief as possible, it'd be great. So.
Yeah, thank you. I will be brief, and do you have to advance my slides for me, Mitchell?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about two things today. The first one, and if you have more questions, Rebecca Harper has been working on this with us as a partner. But we got funds through the NRCS for or the National Water Quality Initiative. And any projects that are on a farm or forest within the boundary are eligible. The first step was a planning phase, which we've completed. That plan is called a source water assessment. Skip to the next page, please, or next slide. It's on our water quality page. Go to the next slide, please. So if anybody wants to look at that document, it's huge, but it's online. And in there, we identified types of projects that would benefit the Clear Lake watershed. And while this talks about surface water, it opens up potential for there to be groundwater and surface water projects. And what this project does, next click, you got to click and then go to the next one. There you go. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh,
Went
too fast.
far.
Okay. So what it does is anybody with agricultural land, that includes the cropland, grassland, rangeland, pasture land, or forest lands. And really NRCS is really lax about what is considered a forest. But they can be eligible for this project or projects. And basically it's volunteer. There's no requirements. It's not regulatory at all. But a property owner can work with NRCS and get a plan written. And then as long as they adhere to the plan, they can get reimbursed for all of those funds. And it can be technical and they can actually be implementation projects. And sometimes in some situations, the cost to implement the project can be more than what NRCS would reimburse, but in other times it could be less. And next slide, please. So some of these projects, and all of these are relevant for water quality improvement. So how do we improve water quality downstream? But you guys know in the basin that there's lots of connections between the basin, groundwater and surface water. So if you have any stream restoration projects, or if you wanted help doing stream restoration stabilization, so you don't lose your property into your ag space, that would count under this. If you have a little road or culvert that's collapsing and you know there's some hitch that come up there, if you want that culvert replaced and that little road or pathway replaced, they can pay for it because it helps with this fish passage improvement, erosion reduction, and then also things like fencing repair for livestock that meander. And there's lots of other things that can just help improve the landscape that would have benefit, especially for ag. And next slide, please. So here's some examples of some of those. There are some things on there like, you know, for wells, also like channel or canal updates. I don't know how many of those there are around, but there's also the potential for like pond or retention basin. Now NRCS is kind of like, that's a big project, especially because you have to bring in the state and get Army Corps and maybe fish and wildlife permits. But that is the role of the district. So at Watershed Protection District, our role is to help the property owners improve water quality, surface and groundwater. So that's where we can facilitate help with the district. Since we can't give you funds to do that and we can't pay for some of these projects on private property, the private property owner can get the funds from NRCS for this, and then we can help facilitate some of the permitting and working with the state and trying to help figure out how some of these projects can actually get made on the land so they can provide a benefit, like having a retention storage pond for the frost protection on vineyards or something like that. Next slide. And there's so many, these are NRCS standard practices. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with them. But if you want to know if you're eligible, the first thing is to fill out the survey, and then NRCS will actually schedule a site visit. And there's probably a lot of things on there that they could help with as part of the plan that maybe you don't know about. There's a lot of things I'm learning about that's available. And again, Rebecca Harper has been instrumental in helping with this and get the word out. So I just want to make sure that this group was aware that there is resources available for private properties, especially if funding through the county is limited. So that's the first program. Now, if there's other land uses, public agency tribal lands, as well as projects that maybe expand multiple properties and are adjacent to public properties, there is another resource opportunity. And this will be from the future water bond. So next slide, please. So what we have to do first, if we want to be eligible at all for any of the future water bonds, and that water bond fund can include things for these large scale groundwater projects that you guys need funded in the basin without having to raise the assessment fees or taxes for the people that live there. We have to put the plan together now, so then we're eligible for those funds. Next slide. And this is in state law. So if we want anything that's like stormwater capture reuse, you know, we want to hold any water as part of water bond funds, we have to have what's called the Stormwater Resources Management Plan, and that's what we're building now. The rest of the state has all made their plans, and we were left out because we were in recovery from the Valley Fire. So in 2015 and 16, the rest of the state all got their plans made. They all got Prop 1 funds. We could not be eligible for Prop 1 funds for these kinds of projects because we didn't have a plan because we were recovering from fires for those chunks of years. This is the actual water code that describes that. Next slide, please. Here's some examples of how California is really invested in this. This is not going away for using stormwater as a recharge. So there definitely is a funnel and a pathway from the state perspective to do this. And we want to be able to be eligible for funds to be able to make these projects reality. And I looked to the Yolo County Stormwater Resources Plan. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff for stormwater capture and reuse, and they're full of ag. And they have groundwater sustainability basins also. And next slide. And here's an example. So in the plan, this is the one from Stanislaus County. They have their project sites kind of identified, but there are not a lot of details about these projects. It's literally, we can have a dot on a point that says, here's a spot where we can do some groundwater recharge in an area that has local flooding. So we'd be storing water for groundwater recharge instead of it just piling up on the street and then being pushed through a culvert out to Clear Lake. And so this is what we're trying to populate now, is just a general map of potential projects. And they can be as brief as like a concept in your head. If you're like, water collects over there, it'd be a good place to put a retention basin. And then maybe we could use that water somewhere else later. Like if it's just concept of maybe something that would work, let's get it down and put it as a point in the map. And then we would be eligible to be able to fund it later. And then the next few slides just kind of reiterate what the requirements are. So what has to be in there's anything that improves water quality, prevent flooding. Just click next, because I wanted to pinpoint, for this group, the recharge of groundwater aquifers through previous urban or agricultural areas, support sustainable groundwater levels, increase local water supplies. So specifically included in there as a requirement of this plan under their guiding principles. And then augmentation of water supplies through rainwater harvesting and a recharge, which I know there's some aspects in the plan requirements that you guys had that these meet. Next slide, and I think this just again reiterates these projects all have multi-benefit use, especially in Big Valley Basin. We know that the state is very invested in the idea that surface and groundwater are connected. And so that would automatically be these multiple benefit uses. Next, and also maximizes flood management because Big Valley Basin does flood. Next slide. Okay, in-stream flows. Yep. Okay, so we're looking for projects in the plan. We're working with the California Rural Water Association. And you guys had some on your plan list of objectives for estimating water demand. And I would suggest reaching out to the California Water Association because they know, especially for domestic and other water uses, how to kind of do that. And they also have resources. They get money from Farm Bill. So sometimes they have staff that are looking for things to do that's paid for. But we're working with them and MC Engineering to complete the plan for Stormwater Resources Plan. And next slide. So if you go on our website, this is where the survey is. And if you click on, so you go to the homepage and you scroll down and you click on it, not the Quagga Muscle one, but the one above that says Clean Water Community, Improve Water Quality in Lake County. Click on that. And then next slide. So this is what that looks like. And it says 319 because we got a 319 grant that had similar components. And so we had a call for those projects separately. But now we're opening the same survey for the Stormwater Resources Management Plan, which would be specific for the water bond funds, while the 319 plan was specific for 319 non-point solution funds, which I saw you guys also had a point on your plan that was non-point solution. Or non-point source pollution items too. So maybe there's some way that some of these things can meet those items. So if you go there, the survey, you can take it in a minute. It asks you the general area of where you are and what the type of project is that you're thinking of. And then we can be able to reach out for more information or include it in the plan. So then we're more eligible for those funds for the water bond. And we're talking about millions of dollars to be available through the water bond funding. And next slide is just the resources. So if you have any questions, again, Rebecca is a great resource for the NRCS and WQI funds. And then if you have any questions about the Stormwater Resources Plan or projects that might be good for that, let me know because we want to get them in as soon as possible. If that water bond gets approved in November, they're going to spend the next year getting planning out, planning calls out and getting people to submit applications. So that is all I have, and I'll take any questions, and I hope that wasn't too slow. And yeah.
That was great. Thank you, Angela.
So, is stormwater, reusing stormwater, does it get purified or something, or it can be sort of gross, can it?
So there is ways to recapture stormwater. So what the idea is that you collect it and it settles and sediments and materials settle out, and then you can reuse the top part of it. It's literally, you know, Highland Springs Reservoir is a stormwater capture system that was put in there for flood and stormwater. Same thing with Adobe Creek. They're both in there. They collect stormwater and it's released later. So
Okay, that makes sense to me. Thank
Yeah.
you. And one more question, didn't they, I know there's a lot of Prop ones, you know, that have happened over the years, but didn't they use 15 million to purchase the land in the Middle Creek Restoration Project from Prop one?
I don't know for that for sure. I know special districts got like 5 million of it through Prop 1 through the integrated West Side Integrated Regional Management Plan to do drinking water pipe replacements and drinking water storage replacements. But those projects aren't considered stormwater capture reuse, so they were eligible for those funds. So if we have any projects that wants to be anywhere close to like holding water or reusing water, green infrastructure, anything stormwater, groundwater recharge, anything like that, we have to have a stormwater resources management plan or we will not be eligible.
Okay.
So is that plan, excuse me, is that plan that you're talking about, is that a county-wide plan or does each individual project have to prepare one?
No, we're doing a countywide plan for the entire Lake County because it's watershed protection district. The jurisdiction is the entire county. Obviously we can't do projects on like federal land unless the Forest Service comes to us and is like, we want to do a project. We want to use these funds to do it. But yeah, if there's a small project, individual project on a private property, public property, adjacent multiple properties, then we want to include it in the plan. So it could be eligible for those funds. And I can't guarantee that every single project can be eligible or have priority. But we want to make that, we don't want anything to be excluded and then not eligible because that would be a big bummer.
So do we have a plan at all right now, or you guys are working on it right now?
We have no plan right now because we were recovering from the fire when they were doling out the planning
Okay, I
funds in
get it.
2015.
Sorry.
That's okay. We've tried to use other plans like the integrated watershed management plan and it did not work. They said no.
Great.
So, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Angela. We'll move along to our next one. Thank you, Angela, for presenting that. I think it's fantastic and another resource that we have here to be able to not put that
And a
burden
lot
on
of
other
work
people.
to put
Yes,
these plans
yes.
together, so good job.
So thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're gonna move to agenda item 5, and I apologize, we only have about 7 minutes left, so we're gonna try to get through this as fast as possible, but this is the update on the Department of Water Resources Technical Support Services and the Facilitation Support Services. So we'll move on to Quinn, if you want to give a quick little update.
Yeah, sure. So we'll go rapid TSS update. So at the end of May this year, we put in the Kelsey Creek site on the map on the right. It is the star on the right there that Mitchell's hovering his mouse around. The reason we did not then put in the more western site right after it was because the drilling contractor we were using sort of ran out of staff and imploded as a company. So they're kind of in a transitioning period right now. So we just got funding in July for a different contractor. We currently have almost everything in place for that. And the contractor is ready to go. We're going to do a site visit probably early next week with them. The only thing we're waiting on is for the funds to clear. That's a fiscal year state bureaucracy thing that I don't fully understand myself either, but eventually someone in Sacramento is going to give me an email and say, you're good, put the well in. And then at that point, we're kind of hoping, we've been told any day now. So we're hoping end of this month, beginning of September on that one. Who's the contractor? The current one is Greg Drilling.
Great.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they're based out of. GREGG.
Martinez.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then the only other thing is we're hoping to have groundwater level sensors somewhat soon on the Kelsey Creek site and shortly thereafter on the Adobe Creek site. And we're also right now toying with the idea of putting an additional transducer in Adobe Creek as a water level stage sensor to kind of correlate surface water and groundwater together at that site.
How deep
for those? The first one?
340 feet was total depth. I think we screen, it's two completions, so we've got a 40 to 60 foot screen for a shallow one and a, oh gosh, 240 to 280 foot, I think, is the deep screen.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's a wonderful thing that we've gotten from the state.
Are those the
Huge.
only two, or are there gonna be more?
No, so you can see on the left there, there's actually, that's the original planned request. That's the request we originally got. So
Okay,
those stars that you could see were requested deep completion wells. So the two that we're currently talking about are those. There's also a few triangles up north by the shore, and those are much shallower surface groundwater interaction monitoring wells. I'm not sure exactly when the next two deep wells and to what extent those shallow surface water interaction wells are going to be, but those are on the docket. But the way TSS works is we get a few in for one county, and then we have to move on to basins that don't have any wells, and it's sort of a rotational.
Sure.
So got to wait until it's Lake County's turn again. Unfortunately.
okay, so we've got two now, and we've got,
You have one now, you will have two
Yeah.
probably by the end of the year for sure.
okay.
And the funds for that came from DWR.
Yeah, this is a DWR. It's not really a grant, but it's a technical assistance program. So we just pay for putting it in with minor cost to the county.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And we will move on to agenda item 5.2 FSS update. And I believe Bridget will take in this one. I apologize. Don't feel like you need to rush, but
I'll keep it brief, because I think everyone in this room has heard an update on what Christy and I are scoped to do in Lake County for the next little more than a year. We're here to support GSPAC meetings. We're also here to support with some outreach activities. I heard some really good conversation about ways we could collaborate on some additional outreach opportunities today. And then we're also here, importantly, to help fill those unfilled GSPAC seats. So there's currently, as we've discussed, some private user, environmental user, and domestic, that's private, and underrepresented users that we'd like to have on the GSPAC. Those seats are currently unfilled. And so our process has been doing interviews with GSPAC members to better understand what opportunities there are to fill those seats and what gaps there are, kind of challenges in filling those. I've completed most of those interviews, though not all. So we have some preliminary findings, and in the November meeting, we'll give a more thorough update once we've completed all those interviews. But some preliminary findings are that committee members really value the face-to-face communication. That also poses some challenges as it relates to folks who are volunteering who may want to zoom in. And so there's some challenges there that I'll talk about when we get to, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Everyone I've talked to has been really motivated to have a really democratic and collaborative committee. That has really shown through in all of the interviews. And so that's been awesome. I think that's something that you all should be really proud of, because that's not the case in all basins. And I think it's a lot of opportunities that creates. And then last, committee members have found participation in the GSPAC to be both personally and professionally rewarding. Some key takeaways as it relates to kind of qualities we're looking for in a potential GSPAC member. Obviously interested in groundwater issues, having an open mind and collaborative mindset, having special knowledge relevant to the GSPAC. And then there's been some discussion, folks have had kind of mixed feelings and different feelings. So this will be continued discussion about if they need to definitely live in Lake County, in the Big Valley Basin, or if they might have some special knowledge, if it'd be okay if they lived out of Basin and use that special knowledge to benefit the GSPAC. So that's kind of a source of ongoing conversation. And then some identified obstacles to filling those seats are the time commitment of the meetings. I think that when GSPAC was in full swing developing the GSP, that was particularly true. I think right now we're meeting quarterly, and so we're hopeful that that time commitment piece is a little bit alleviated. But the timing of the meetings, being in the middle of the day for folks who may be working and may not be able to attend these meetings as part of their job, is something that we'll need to continue to think about how to best address. Next slide. So as terms of next steps for this kind of outreach process and filling those unfilled seats, I'm going to finish those interviews with GSPAC members I haven't had a chance to talk to yet. I'll conduct some desktops, online research, making some phone calls to organizations, understanding networks and potential candidates. I'll develop a list of those potential candidates and circulate it. And I'll also do some initial calls with those candidates to see if they're interested and give some more information. If those folks were interested, that would ultimately come up to a GSPAC vote. And so that's a process that's laid out in the charter. But there'll be plenty of opportunity for you all to talk with these folks and understand what their interest and background is. Any questions?
Just want to add two quick things. The big so what, because everybody keeps asking, well, why is this important? It was the same way that we found all of you who sit around the table, was that kind of questionnaire, and then have interviews and try to build it. But importantly too is that the requirement of Sigma does say that you consider what they call interested parties, beneficial users and uses of groundwater, and it spells it out. It's not you don't have to have one for each one of them, and then it's open to some others, but it's just really important to be thoughtful throughout your process to think, who does this impact, who might it affect, who else needs to have a voice in this, who else needs to know. And there is no other basin, I will put this on record, there is no other basin who has done outreach so publicly and so transparently throughout the GSP development and this advisory committee than this county. It's really quite remarkable. And so you have that going for you, and this just builds upon that.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave this point for any public comments. I don't believe we have anybody really from the public here. So seeing none, I'll close that. And just wanted to remind everybody of the future GSPAC meeting date, which will be November 8th, 2024. And we have this all online. We have links to stay connected. We have a listserv. We send it out to, I believe there's like 70 to 80 people on there currently that are interested. Hopefully we start seeing more participation.
After the Board of Supervisors update, I think you will. Yeah.
And then this slide has a little bit of other future dates, not super critical, but I just want to thank you all for being here today. I know that it's a big time commitment, and we truly do value your input and your expertise that you bring to the table. And I hope that today was kind of a reset and just re-energize you guys for why this is important and where we're going from here, and the big things and key takeaways. So
Is this on the website?
not yet. I will be sending that out to everybody after this meeting. That way you have it all. So
Well, I can't.
the slide deck is not on there yet, but I'll send you the slide deck. Yeah.
But, if I can see the slides, that's great.
Okay.
Some of these are interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all again. I want to appreciate Eddie for coming down and being able to talk very technical about this stuff. I would love to have the knowledge that he has someday, but it's great to have him as a source as well as everybody that came.
He lived in this
And,
room for a good long
yeah.
time, so.
So it's a lot of great work, and I hope we can continue it. And I apologize for taking us over a little bit. But
7 minutes is not
Yeah.
bad, Mitchell.
Yeah.
thank you all. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you. Right.
Say hi to Pat for us, Dave, when you talk
Yeah.
to
I
him.
will, and
Yeah.
he said that he's intending to talk to Bridget soon. I apologize for not connecting yet.
No worries at all. I know it's a busy time of year.
Thanks, Val.
Thanks, Val.
Thanks, Val.